Well, I don't know about you guys, but as a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut. Yeah, I wanted to be that nerd. I actually, in junior high and high school, went to space camp down in Huntsville, Alabama. I had a paper route, and I saved my money. And back then, it was like $1,000 to go to a week at space camp. I don't even want to know what it is now. But I saved my money, and I went to space camp, and I wanted to fly in the shuttle. Now, at space camp, I'll give you a little nugget of a story that I wasn't going to share. I actually crashed the shuttle, not the real shuttle because they didn't give us that, but they put us in a simulator and they throw a bunch of stuff at you. And there was a fire in the shuttle, and we were supposed to know where all the little knobs were and everything, and I didn't know where the fire extinguisher was, so I burned everybody up. From that point on, I was the director of mission control and never saw the shuttle simulator again. So I think that just ruined my times as a potential astronaut. But the question that I asked usually growing up was, why in the world did we ever start a space program? Why did we go to the moon? You know, you got to think 50 years ago this July, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins orbited the moon. Buzz and Neil landed on the moon 50 years ago. So you got to think about what was going on there. Is the space race was going on. It went on from 1955 to 1975. Okay, none of you were born. I was 2 years old when it ended. Good, so that's out of the way. But what had happened was the USA was getting our butts kicked because Sputnik in 1957 was Russian. The Russians sent the first man into space in April of 1961. They sent the first woman in space. They sent the first duo in space, the first trio in space. They sent the first animal in space in Sputnik 2, which was that little dog. So, I mean, they were killing us. So here we go. We go back to May 25th, 1962. And JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, so President Kennedy, was addressing a joint session of Congress. And it was a State of the Union. Usually the State of the Union's in January. This year it was a week late because of all the stuff we were going through. But it's usually in January and there's one a year. But sometimes there's two a year or three a year. It's whenever the Congress wants to invite the president in, and they invited JFK in because they were going to address what has just happened with Cuba and also what's going on with the space race. So JFK, in his speech, lays out that America is a country of dreamers, explorers. He lays out that if we're going to go into space, we're going to do it as free men, because you have two different concepts for the conquest of space. One, the Russians or the Soviets were more of, we're going to do this, but we're going to do it for a military value. In America, we want to do it for, not saying that we didn't have military ideas in there, but we wanted to do it because we wanted to explore and have freedom and see where we could learn from science. So he says, number one, that's who we are. Then he gives this famous quote that maybe some of you heard, maybe some, and he goes, you know what, I think that this nation should commit itself of achieving the goal before the decade's out, so before 1970, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. All right, let's think about where America is in our space program. Alan Shepard had just been launched into space for like 30 seconds, and that's it. He didn't orbit. He went up, came down. Every other rocket has exploded. I mean, we don't have the technology none of the technology was created for communication of going from the Earth to the moon. Nobody had any idea what it would take to get a spacecraft out of orbit. We had never been in orbit. How do you keep somebody alive in space? How do you get them back? Great, you get them to the moon, but how do you get them back? All these things, and then what happened in 1963? JFK was killed in Dallas, Texas. So the guy that laid out the vision in 1962 was killed in 1963 by an assassin's bullet, and now our country is trying to figure out how do we do that. So we went through the Mercury program, the Gemini program, which was a two-man program, and then we got to the Apollo program. So we're moving. But then Apollo 1 happened. An astronaut from Indiana named Gus Grissom and Roger Chaffee, and I forget the other guy's name, but the idea was they were in a test on Apollo 1 on the landing, on the launch pad, and there was a fire, and we lost all three of them. So here we are starting to gain progress, and automatically have a fire that we have to relook at everything again. But then what happened? Well, July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, 6 months before the deadline. How in the world did that happen? Could we do that today? Do you see that kind of advancements happening today? Because you got to think, computers at this time, the best computer wouldn't fit into the room that we're sitting in. It just wouldn't. The moon's about 250,000 miles away. That's like 100 trips back and forth to California, guys. I mean, that's how far it is away. We don't have telecommunication that can reach that far. How are we going to keep people alive? All those things that I talked about, and then our standard barrier is no longer alive. And I think the reason why we don't have those kind of achievements today is because we don't ask the right questions. I don't think we ask the right questions. And there's a couple of books I just want to encourage you maybe to read or pick up. This one is QBD, The Question Behind the Question. It's really good. It's an easy read. Aaron Cook suggested this. Another book that's pretty new is called A More Beautiful Question. And I'm going to quote a little bit of this by Warren Berger. It's really good about talking about like why, what if, and how. And then another great book is Necessary Endings by Dr. Henry Cloud, talking about when do things need to stop, when do things need to start, and it all comes back to questions. So let's just jump right in and talk about it. Do you have the skills to answer or ask questions? Is that a skill set of yours? Are you a good question asker? Is that something that you do? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. And I think a lot of times is we don't have that skill, or we don't have that word, if you want to use this, it's in the business world, acumen, which means that judgment, that ability to make quick decisions. We don't have that when it comes to inquiry or questions. So let me give you a definition. And I just came up with this week, so if it doesn't make sense, it's my fault. But inquiry, the idea of seeking clarity, and acumen, the idea of having good judgment and able to make a good decision, is this. It's the ability to recognize that you need effective inquiry. So you need to, first of all, recognize that you need to be thinking and looking for clarity, asking good questions, being innovative. But then also the skill to utilize questions to get clarity of purpose, plan, and action. So what's your goal? Your goal is to get clarity. Your goal is to understand things. So what I want to do is I want to walk you through these 4 questions. We talk about them all the time, but the first question is kind of, it's very easy. It's who. And the reason why we start with who is because it's all about people, right? So whenever I ask a question, usually if I don't go back to who am I asking the question about, I'm going to miss something. We had a situation happen in the office this week where there was another office that handled something probably not the way we would want it to. But if I would have just looked at the situation and not the person, I would have got really mad really quick. But because I asked myself the question, who are they? What are they going through? What is their job? I'm able to go, okay, I see why they're a little frustrated, because we made their job a little harder, right? So who's the first one? The next one is why. And the why, let me jump back here and say that this is their identity. I know Dr. White's talking a lot about identity in Christ, but this is who they are. So if I know who Cassie is, when I start to ask questions about maybe like, why is she doing this? I'm going to go back to this. But I also need to know who God created me to be. God created me as I'm a lot more of a reactionary person than a responder. So I need to know that about myself, so when I start asking questions, I don't automatically jump to the wrong conclusion. So a lot of the books that you read leave this part out. I believe that this part is so valuable because it's who we are as Christ followers. Because if we don't look at this of who God made us to be and who God made the other people to be that we're dealing with, we're going to miss an opportunity. So now we jump to why. And why is the purpose? So this is kind of when I'm looking at the why, I'm looking at the heart of what's going on, and I'm looking kind of at the purpose statement. So when I'm looking at the heart of what's going on, I'm trying to understand what's going on, okay? So that's the why. And then I go down here to the what, and what the what provides me is, this is the preparation or the prep, and this is the dream phase. This is where I'm allowed to think through what are the new options, what are other things that are going on, think through. So I'm using critical thinking and I'm using integrated thinking. And if you're wondering what integrative thinking is just the idea that you're not going to accept the first option or the second option. You're going to look and mix them all together and try to find the other options. So now I've got the what, and then I jump to the how, which is the performance. And this is the action phase. This is where we make things happen. So this is where we take action. And then other thing we do, we evaluate and we assess. And then we course correct, right? Or if we don't need a course correct, maybe we innovate. And the reason why I tell you these things right here is because I think I want to go back and remind you of a couple things. One, you're a knowledge worker, meaning it is your job to get the job done. If you think it's not your job, then you're missing something. We have too many people that sit in churches, that sit in organizations. Can I tell you, we have too many people that act as parents or spouses that think, well, it's the other person's job. It's your job to make your family. Some of you are getting married here in the summer. It's your job to make your family a success. Even if the other person doesn't do that, it is your job to make your family a success. It is your job to make your organization a success. You might not be the boss. You probably won't be the first day, but it's your job to make that organization successful. What about churches? It's your job to get involved in churches. So number one, you're a knowledge worker. Another reason why you ask questions is questions allow you to be creative. Some of you are creative in this group. Some of you are graphic designers. Some of you do other things like that. And you're creative, but it starts with questionings of, I wonder if I did this. Do you ever think about how creative people really are really good? It's because they're asking the questions. I wonder if I tried this, would this look good? They try it, doesn't work, they erase it. They try it again, they erase it. They try it again, they erase it until they find something that works. So I think you need to understand, number one, you're a knowledge worker. Number two, that creativity happens because of questions, and questions need clarity. So if we want to keep breaking these things down, I think it's really important that you look at these questions from the idea that if I understand the why and the who of somebody, I am aware of what's going on. And I think a lot of times we make bad decisions or bad conclusions because we're not aware of what's going on. So that's the awareness. I'm going to come back to all this. Right here is more of the buy-in. So if they start to have the opportunity to prep, or so when I played basketball, when I had the opportunity to go to practice, I started buying into my coach's philosophy. That's a buy-in. And then the last one is ownership. So once I have buy-in, now when I get to the action phase, I'm taking complete ownership of my action. So when you look at questions, you got to look at it this way. Am I aware, first of all, what's going on and who's involved? Am I aware of that? Because if I jump all the way down here to ownership and I say, okay, do my job, and I'm asking questions, okay, what is my job? How do I do my job? How do I set things up? How do I do graphic design? How do I answer phones? Whatever. If I'm doing that first, I'm missing the opportunity to really understand the heart behind it, which is here. So what President Kennedy did in May 25th before Congress, he was giving the heart laid out. He was saying, you know what? I think free men are the ones that need to conquer space first. We're a country of dreamers, of doers, of explorers, and it's what's next. So he's laying out this vision in 1961. He's laying out this vision in 1961, but we didn't land on the moon until 1969. He died in 1963, and we're still talking about him in 2019. You see what he just did? He used the power of questions to get something accomplished. So he laid out to say who we are as America, what's our dream, okay, what's it going to take? Are you ready to buy in? And then he got all these people. It was a $25 million project to land on the moon. Now, that'd probably be a lot more today. But it was a $25 million project in the 60s, and he got the American people to buy into that, even though we had only launched a man in space for 30 to 60 seconds. Why? Because he was leading them, Okay, this is who we are. We're dreamers, we're explorers. This is what we're going to do. Now, what are you going to do? The buy-in. And then he got him to the ownership where 6 years later, after his death, they land on the moon. So the question really is for us is how do we do this with people? How do we do this with our teams? Number one, you need to know who your teammates are. They need to know who you are so that they feel comfortable in asking questions. Jake said something to me this morning that he did not know that this would be part of this talk, but he said, hey, Brian, you're very approachable. He said it a lot better and a lot nicer than that, and it was at 6:45 in the morning. So, but the whole idea, he said that, and that really showed me one thing, is if I'm not approachable, none of this matters, right? If you don't know me and I don't know you, it doesn't matter. So we got to know who the people are we work with. We got to know why. What's going on, the heart of it. So for me, my job is to get to know John Wood and to know his heart. And there's a word I want you to remember. It's called deference. And you might have never heard it, but the idea of deference is doing something for other people because it's them. So for me, I have deference to my boss, meaning everything I do, I need to show deference to John Wood. Meaning I've got to know him and think how he thinks so I can make decisions that he would make. That makes me a knowledge worker. But I also got to know Cassie or Caleb or Ryan or Claire or who else. I've got to know them so that when I make decisions for their group or we make decisions together, I can show deference to them because I know how it affects them. You got to know your people. You got to know the heart. This is the phase we're going to come back to, but then you got to take action. This is really where I think we don't do things well. Because we don't want to ask the question, what if? You know, one of the things you hear, and it's in Disney lore, or Disney it's part of him. He used to say all the time, what if, what if, what if? He would go into his animators and go, what if you tried it this way? What he was doing was trying to get them to think, okay, great, you've got this great cartoon right here. What if we tried it a little bit different? Great, the Pirates of the Caribbean looks awesome, but what if we did it this way? Great, we're going to do something at the World's Fair 11 months from now, and now we're going to start, we're going to do a boat ride, and it's going to be all about kids, and the people are looking at him like, why in the world? But what that developed was, it's a small world, and it's one of the most popular rides at the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World. The idea is he asked the question, what if? So what I want us to do is think more of what if? What if we push this a little bit more? What if we innovate? So how do we do all these? How do we do the who, why, what, and how? I think there's a couple of things I want to leave you with. Number one, you got to develop your inquiry muscles, meaning this. You've got to learn how to ask questions. And here's how you do it. You got to read. That's why I showed you books today. You got to read. You got to listen to people. You've got to be willing to ask questions. And you got to be willing to think critically. That means when you've got something that you're working on, so Nathan, if it's graphic design and you're working on it, it's okay, yeah, this is done, this is great, but the next time, hey, how can we fix this? How can we improve this? There's nothing wrong with asking that question. Our generations, yours, mine, are looking at things like, well, that's good enough. You know what? We would have never landed a man on the moon if we always said good enough. They're looking for ways to improve. So you gotta make your muscles bigger in that one, as far as inquiry. You can't just, hey, one day I'll think of good questions. Your first interview. So your first interview to go through, they're gonna look at you and go, hey, do you have any questions? And usually you look at them like, because you don't have any. What if you had questions? What if you thought through, okay, who are you as an organization? Why are you here? What's your heart? And then you listen like, oh, this is how you want us to perform. And then they ask questions, well, hey, what if you tried it this way? Oh my goodness, you're going in as a knowledge worker right away and you're putting the beauty of Christ on display. That's awesome. So number one, build your muscles. Number two, have your own questions ready for individuals and for situations. So when I meet new people, it might surprise you, but I'm a little bit shy when it comes to meeting new people. I hate it. I start to sweat, don't like it, don't like sitting on airplanes by people. I want to sit on the aisle, I don't want to sit by anybody except for people I know. But it's hard for me, so I've had to develop questions that I ask. You know, it's like, hey, tell me your story. Where are you from? Because as soon as you start to ask where somebody's from, you can start to get to know their who. So I have questions for people. I have questions for situations. I know myself well enough that I react. I already told you that. I have questions for difficult situations that I start with. Hey, what are you feeling right now? Talk to me how you think that this should go. Because if I don't start that way, my mind, I'm going to jump to here and I'm going to miss the whole opportunity. And then the last one, so you've got your muscles, you've got your, have those great questions. And then the last one I want you to do is just be willing to ask those questions. And what I mean by that is you've got to have collaboration and cooperation, meaning sometimes you're going to have to be that active teammate. Sometimes you're in an office, you're making decisions, you're on a whiteboard, you're drawing things out, you're offering suggestions, you're saying that's a great idea, that's a bad idea. Other times you just got to cooperate, meaning, and just do the job. There are some times, like I'll have conversations with John Wood, or even I've had conversation with Dr. White, but there are times when Dr. White or John have made a decision, the questioning is over, and now it's my job to do the job. And that's cooperation. And it all goes back to, if I know the who and the why, I'm very understanding of awareness. I know what's going on. If I'm in my what or my what if part, I'm starting to buy in because I'm dreaming. I'm dreaming of things like, hey, how do we make getting started better? How do we make info better? How do we make ops better? How do we make SGA better? I'm dreaming. I'm buying into what the who and the why is. And then once I buy in, then I have ownership. Think through that. You see, awareness, buy-in, ownership. So your goal always is to move yourself and others through the awareness, buy-in, and ownership. If you jump to ownership first and you don't have awareness and buy-in, it's all about you. If you jump to buy-in first, you're going to burn out quick. You got to know the heart. Then you buy in, and then you have ownership. So when you look at inquiry acumen, so the ability to make good decisions and quick, you've got to know that questioning is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Ladies, ask questions of your husbands. Guys, ask questions of your wife. Don't be afraid to ask hard questions because you're trying to gain that clarity so that you can be a group together. Same thing with your bosses. Don't make your boss be the one to give you clarity. Ask for it. It's going to make you better because it's going to get your mind thinking. Because what would happen what would be the next thing that we would do, like landing on the moon? Right now, we haven't done anything. And that's not just Christians, that's our world as a whole, is we've gotten so reliant on what's in our hands, in our cell phones, or what we know that we're not willing to push the envelope because we don't ask good questions. Ask good questions. Have that acumen to have that good judgment and that quick decision making.